The city of New York hummed with the kind of energy that only a metropolis of its stature could offer. Streets crisscrossed in intricate patterns of light and sound, an orchestra of life playing beneath the towering silhouettes of glass and steel. It was the city of dreams, of ambition, of reinvention. But for Jasmine Wright, standing at the door of her penthouse staring into the darkness of her future, it was a city of sorrow, a place where dreams could be both made and shattered in the blink of an eye. She had always believed in the notion of love, the kind that made the heart race and the soul soar. A love that could transcend all boundaries, that could withstand time and challenge. And when she had married Adam Montgomery, the powerful real estate mogul whose name echoed in every corner of Manhattan, she had thought she had found just that, her forever. Adam, with his suave charm and undeniable ambition, had once been everything she ever wanted. She had seen in him not just a man of success, but a partner with whom she could share her life's work, her dreams, her heart. But that evening, as Jasmine stood in the hallway of their luxurious apartment, the weight of 1,000 unspoken words pressed against her chest. The scent of lavender from the bouquet she had carried home from her business meeting earlier in the day lingered in the air, an ironic contrast to the storm brewing inside her. She had arrived home early, excited to surprise Adam with the news of a major contract she had just secured for her event planning business. It was a contract that would change everything for her, one she had worked tirelessly for, and she couldn't wait to celebrate with him. But as she reached the hallway, a sound stopped her in her tracks. It was laughter. It was the kind of laughter that carried warmth, the kind that made everything seem easy, effortless, joyous. Jasmine's heart fluttered a fleeting hope that perhaps Adam had friends over. Perhaps they were celebrating something she had missed, perhaps. Perhaps she was wrong. But when she turned the corner, her breath caught in her throat. There in their shared sanctuary, in the very bed where they had whispered their hopes and dreams, lay Adam, her husband, her confidant, entangled with another woman. The woman was young, beautiful, with golden hair that spilled across their white linens like an ethereal halo. Jasmine's mind tried to comprehend what she saw, but nothing could have prepared her for the raw, aching betrayal that slashed through her heart like a dagger. Time slowed. The world around her vanished. The only thing that remained was the sound of her heartbeat, a frantic pulse in her ears, drowning out the laughter that still echoed from the other side of the room. Adam's eyes, those eyes that had once promised her the world, were now filled with something she couldn't quite place. But it wasn't love. It wasn't devotion. It was a hollow stare, the kind that belonged to a man who no longer felt bound to her. And yet, even as their bodies lay in the act of betrayal, he still managed to speak his words sharp and cruel. "You never suspected, did you?" Adam's voice floated through the air, laced with arrogance. "You're so busy with your little empire, Jasmine, that you didn't even notice the cracks forming at home. I don't need your business connections anymore. Once this deal goes through, I'll be rid of you." The words sliced through her like glass. She had always prided herself on building something of her own, creating a name for herself in an industry where women often had to fight for their place. But now everything she had worked for, every dream they had shared, seemed like a fleeting illusion. Her heart pounded in her chest, every beat a reminder of how deeply she had loved him, how deeply she had believed in their partnership. And yet here he was, in the arms of someone else, as though everything she had built alongside him was nothing more than a game, a stepping stone toward his next conquest. Jasmine stood frozen for a long moment, her gaze fixed on the scene in front of her. There was no anger in her heart, not yet, just a cold emptiness, a quiet understanding that everything she had thought she knew about love, about Adam, was now a lie. She reached into her bag, her fingers trembling as she pulled out the envelope she had prepared earlier that morning. The divorce papers, the legal end to everything they had built together, everything she had believed in. Slowly, she placed the papers on the pillow next to Adam, her hands steady despite the tumult inside. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. As she turned to leave, Adam called out to her, his voice laced with frustration. "Jasmine, this is just a phase. We can work through this. But Jasmine didn't stop. She didn't look back. There was nothing left to say. She walked out of the apartment and into the night, a cool breeze greeting her as she stepped onto the streets of New York. The city was alive, but for Jasmine, everything felt muted. She didn't know where she was going. She didn't know what came next. But she knew one thing for certain: she would never again be the woman she was before this moment. As she disappeared into the shadows, the future stretched before her like a vast unknown. The woman who had once built her life on the promise of love would now build her future on the strength of her own resolve. Are you captivated by Jasmine's story? Do you feel the sting of betrayal and the spark of her inner strength? If you're moved by her journey, please hit that like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and follow for more incredible tales of transformation and triumph. The story is only just beginning. The city never slept, but for Jasmine, New York had become a ghost. The vibrant lights, the bustling streets, everything once imbued with warmth, now felt cold and distant. It was a city of strangers, and though she had been one of them, once she was no longer sure she recognized the woman she had become. Days turned into weeks, and the apartment that once felt like a shared dream now seemed like an empty shell. She moved through it mechanically, her steps hollow as though she were walking through someone else's life. The walls that had borne witness to their laughter, their whispered secrets, their plans for the future, now seemed like silent sentinels, cold and different, offering no comfort. Jasmine stood by the window, her hands resting lightly on the sill. From her vantage point high above the city, the lights below twinkled like distant stars, a faint reflection of the dreams she had once held so dearly. But those dreams had been shattered, scattered like pieces of broken glass across the expanse of her life. She turned away from the window and walked across the room to her desk. There, amidst the scattered papers and unopened bills, lay the envelope she had left behind, the divorce papers. Her hands hovered over them, the weight of her own decision pressing down on her chest. It had been a choice, one that had been hard to make but necessary. She had loved Adam once, truly deeply, and in her heart she had hoped, no, she had prayed that their love would survive anything. But she had been wrong. She had been foolish to believe that something so fragile could withstand the harsh realities of life. Her mind drifted back to that moment, the moment that had altered the course of everything. She could still hear his voice dripping with disdain as he had dismissed her, as though the years they had spent building a life together had meant nothing. It had been more than just infidelity. It had been the erosion of trust, the final brutal unraveling of everything they had once shared. Jasmine had given him everything: her love, her loyalty, her ambition. They had been partners in every sense of the word. She had helped him build his empire, lent him her expertise, her connections. But the moment she had turned her back to leave, the moment she had chosen to walk away, had been the moment she truly understood what love meant. It was a quiet, agonizing realization, the truth that love, when tested by selfishness and deceit, could shatter with a single blow. Sitting down at her desk, she opened the drawer where she kept her personal belongings. Inside, there were photographs of her with Adam, moments from their life together, vacations, holidays, the wedding they had both dreamed of. She sifted through them slowly, each picture a reminder of a time when her world had felt whole. The photos brought with them a strange sense of grief, as though she were mourning a death. But it wasn't the death of a person, it was the death of a dream. The dream that she could have it all: love, success, the promise of a family, of a future. Now all that remained was the hollow echo of what could have been. Jasmine took a deep breath and closed the drawer, the weight of it all pressing heavily against her chest. She had spent so many years working for a future with Adam, believing in the life they had built together. But now, with everything ripped away, she was forced to face an uncertain future alone. She had always prided herself on her ability to take control of her own destiny, to make her own way in a world that often tried to silence women like her. And yet, in the quiet moments of solitude, she found herself questioning everything she had ever known about herself. Who was she now without Adam by her side? Was she still the woman who had dreamed of conquering the world, of leaving a mark on this city, of making something beautiful out of nothing? The phone rang, its sudden noise startling her from her thoughts. She glanced at the screen and saw the name of her best friend Naomi. Naomi had been there for her throughout everything from the moment she had first met Adam to the days following the painful separation. "Hey!" Jasmine answered, her voice sounding foreign to her own ears. "You okay?" Naomi's voice came through the phone, warm and caring, but with an edge of concern. "I haven't heard from you in days." Jasmine sighed, rubbing her temples. "I'm fine," she said, but the words felt hollow. "Just trying to figure things out. You know you don't have to do this alone, right?" Naomi's voice was gentle, but it held an unspoken challenge, urging her friend to confront the truth of her situation. "I know you're strong, but even the strongest people need help sometimes." Jasmine fell silent, the weight of Naomi's words sinking in. For so long she had held on to the illusion that she could fix everything herself, that she could make the pain disappear by sheer willpower. But the truth was that no amount of determination could erase the ache in her heart. No amount of ambition could fill the emptiness that Adam had left behind. "I know," she whispered. "I know." A long pause followed, and then Naomi spoke again, her voice softer. "I'm here, Jess. You don't have to do this alone. Let me help you." Jasmine closed her eyes, allowing herself a brief moment of vulnerability. She hadn't allowed herself that in a long time. But the truth was, she didn't know what to do next. Everything she had worked for, everything she had fought for, felt like it had crumbled beneath her feet. And yet, even in the darkness, there was a flicker of something else, something small but powerful. Hope. "I just need time," Jasmine said finally, her voice steadying. "I'll figure it out. I'll rebuild. I have to." Naomi's voice softened even further, filled with quiet conviction. "You will, Jazz. You're not the same woman who walked into that marriage. You're stronger than you think." The conversation ended soon after, but Jasmine remained seated by the desk, the silence stretching around her. She felt the weight of Naomi's words, the reminder that she was still the woman who had once set out to conquer the world. But now she realized her path had changed. She had lost Adam, but in the process she had found something even more valuable: herself. The grief didn't fade in that moment, nor did the pain of the betrayal. But slowly, she began to understand that it wasn't the end. It was a beginning, one that would take her to places she had never imagined, one that would reshape her and force her to confront the parts of herself she had buried beneath the weight of someone else's expectations. Jasmine stood up from the desk, her heart still heavy, but her resolve beginning to harden. She had once thought her dreams had been shattered beyond repair, but perhaps, just perhaps, they were only being refashioned into something stronger, something more authentic. And though she did not know what the future held, she knew she would no longer allow herself to be defined by the past. It was time to rebuild. It was time to live for herself, not for the dreams of someone who had never truly understood her. And in that moment, as the city buzzed beneath her window, Jasmine Wright realized she had not lost everything. She had merely begun to find the pieces she needed to create a future worthy of her own strength. Brooklyn had always been the beating heart of New York's soul, its eclectic charm and resilient spirit woven into the very fabric of its streets. It was a place where stories began and ended, where dreams were built on the foundation of simple, honest work. For Jasmine Wright, Brooklyn was not just a new home, it was her sanctuary, the first step toward her rebirth. The apartment she had found was modest, tucked away in a quiet corner of the borough, far from the gleaming skyscrapers and the luxurious penthouse that once had been her world. It was the kind of place where time seemed to slow, where the world moved at a different pace. The sounds of traffic, the chatter of neighbors, the occasional laughter of children, it all blended into a harmonious melody, a backdrop to the peace she was learning to find within herself. The bustling streets outside were a far cry from the life she had left behind, but in their noise there was comfort, a subtle reminder that she was not alone. Jasmine had been here for weeks now, settling into her new life, though it still felt like a strange dream. The morning sunlight streamed through the windows, casting soft shadows across the room. The air smelled faintly of fresh coffee, and the quiet hum of the city outside provided a rhythm that matched her heart. She had taken to waking early before the world had fully stirred, allowing herself those precious moments of solitude to gather her thoughts before the day began. In the months since she had left, Jasmine had not only rebuilt the pieces of her heart, but also the fragments of her life. She had reclaimed her name, her voice, her purpose. The event planning business she had once shared with Adam now belonged to her alone, and she had turned it into something entirely her own. With every client she helped, with every event she organized, she could feel the strength she had forgotten pulsing back into her veins. It wasn't easy. There were days when doubt crept in, when the weight of her past tried to pull her back into its shadows. But with every step she took, every deal she signed, she grew more certain that she was not just surviving, she was thriving. Brooklyn, with its rich tapestry of cultures and stories, had become her muse. It was a place where the walls of her heart could be rebuilt, brick by brick, layer by layer. The neighborhoods, with their art galleries and quaint cafes, their cobbled streets and row houses, were a stark contrast to the marble halls of Manhattan, where she had once walked beside Adam, thinking the world was theirs to conquer. But here in this unassuming part of the city, she found something far more valuable than wealth or status. She found herself. Her days were filled with meetings and phone calls, scheduling clients, overseeing venues, coordinating events. Her reputation, built on years of hard work and dedication, began to flourish once again. Each event she organized was a small victory, a testament to her resilience. And yet, despite her growing success, there was always something missing, a void she could not quite fill. Perhaps it was the loneliness that lingered in the quiet moments after the work was done. Perhaps it was the absence of a love that once seemed like it could conquer anything. As she sat at her desk one evening, reviewing a proposal for a wedding she was planning, her mind wandered back to that moment, the moment she had stood in the doorway of their apartment watching Adam, her husband, in the arms of another woman. The image was still vivid in her mind, though she had tried to bury it beneath layers of new memories, new experiences. She had always prided herself on her ability to compartmentalize, to set aside pain and focus on what needed to be done. But the truth was, there was no escaping the emptiness that came from loving someone who had never truly seen her. Jasmine's fingers paused on the page, her thoughts drifting. She had given Adam everything: her trust, her loyalty, her heart. And yet when the time came, when everything they had worked for hung in the balance, he had chosen to betray her. And she had walked away. Not because she had wanted to, but because she had no choice. She had loved him, but she had loved herself more. A soft knock on the door broke her reverie, and she glanced up to see the friendly face of her neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins, standing in the doorway with a warm smile and a basket of homemade muffins. Mrs. Jenkins had been one of the first to welcome her to the building, offering kind words and the promise of friendship. It had been a gesture of genuine kindness, one that had eased the loneliness Jasmine had felt during those first few days of transition. "I thought you might need a little something sweet," Mrs. Jenkins said, her voice as warm as the muffins in her hands. "How's the event planning going?" Jasmine smiled, rising from her desk to take the basket. "It's going well," she said, her voice sincere. "Busy but good. A wedding in a few weeks, then a corporate gala the week after. You know the usual." "Well, I'm sure they'll all be perfect with you in charge," Mrs. Jenkins said, stepping into the room and taking a seat by the window. "I've heard your name mentioned a few times around the building. People seem to really admire your work." Jasmine felt a small swell of pride at the compliment, but the ache of her past still lingered. "It's been a journey," she replied, her voice quiet. "But I'm getting there." There was a pause before Mrs. Jenkins spoke again, her tone softer this time. "I know it's not easy starting over, but I want you to know you've got a community here. You don't have to go through this alone, you know." Jasmine glanced out the window, her gaze drifting over the Brooklyn skyline, the distant hum of the city, a steady reminder of the life she had chosen. It wasn't the life she had once imagined, not the one she had planned with Adam, but it was hers, and that made all the difference. I appreciate that more than you know, Jasmine said, her voice steady with gratitude. I really do. Mrs. Jenkins smiled warmly, her eyes kind. We all need a little help sometimes, dear, and you've got it. We're in this together. The weight of those words settled into Jasmine's heart. For so long she had thought she was alone in this world, that the path ahead was one she had to walk by herself. But now as she looked around her modest apartment at the small yet vibrant life she was building, she realized that the pieces were falling into place. She had everything she needed: strength, purpose, and the support of those who cared. As the days passed, Jasmine began to embrace this new chapter, fully, her heart opening once again to the possibilities that awaited her. She found joy in the little things: the laughter of her neighbors, the warmth of her morning coffee, the pride she felt when she looked at her work. And though the scars of her past would never truly fade, they were no longer the chains that held her back. They had become a part of her story, a story that was still unfolding. Brooklyn had given her something that she had never found in the grandeur of her past life: peace. It wasn't the kind of peace that came from wealth or status. It was the kind that came from within, a quiet, knowing that despite the betrayals and the heartache, she had the strength to rebuild. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the city, Jasmine sat by the window, her heart full of quiet resolve. The road ahead would not be easy, but it was hers to walk, and she would walk it with grace, strength, and the knowledge that her rebirth was not the end of her story. It was only the beginning. It was a soft evening in late autumn, the kind where the golden hues of the setting sun lingered just long enough to paint the city with warmth before the chill of nightfall crept in. Jasmine was sitting in a quiet corner of her favorite cafe in Brooklyn, the low hum of conversations around her, a distant murmur as she sipped her coffee. The cafe, nestled between two vintage bookshops, had become her refuge in the weeks since her move. The mismatched chairs and weathered tables gave it a lived-in charm, as though the space had witnessed generations of whispered stories, heartbreaks, and triumphs. Here Jasmine could breathe, if only for a moment. Her gaze drifted toward the window where the city was already slipping into its evening rhythm. She was still adjusting, still learning how to find peace in the small, tender moments of her new life. It was a delicate process, rebuilding herself after the shattering of everything she had once believed in. She had found her footing in the world of event planning, and while her days were filled with meetings and phone calls, there was a constant undercurrent of something missing, something intangible, like the final piece of a puzzle that eluded her grasp. The bell above the cafe door jingled softly, and Jasmine barely glanced up, absorbed in the warmth of her thoughts. But then she heard it, a voice, low and warm, smooth, like velvet, cutting through the clinking of cups and the shuffle of feet. I hope I'm not interrupting. She looked up, meeting the gaze of a man who stood just inside the door, his silhouette framed by the glow of the street lamp outside. His tall, lean figure was draped in an effortlessly elegant coat, the collar turned up slightly against the evening breeze. He wasn't handsome in the conventional sense. There was a ruggedness to his face, a sharpness to his jaw that spoke of a man who had seen more than his fair share of the world. Yet there was something undeniably magnetic about him, a quiet energy that pulled at her in ways she couldn't quite name. The first thing she noticed, though, were his eyes, piercing blue like a deep ocean under a clear sky. They held hers with an intensity that was disarming, as if he could see through her into the very essence of who she was, the part she had carefully concealed for so long. She found herself momentarily at a loss for words, a strange flutter of something unfamiliar stirring inside her. It had been so long since anyone had looked at her like that, with such knowing, such curiosity. Not at all, she said, her voice steady, though a flicker of surprise passed through her. She motioned toward the empty seat across from her. Please join me. He smiled slightly, the corners of his lips curving with a kind of quiet amusement, before he moved to sit down, his presence somehow filling the space between them in a way that made the room feel smaller, more intimate. I'm Michael, he said, his voice rich, almost melodic. I couldn't help but notice that you seem lost in thought. He studied her with that same intense gaze, but there was an unspoken kindness in his eyes, a gentleness that put her at ease, even as she wondered how he had read her so well. Jasmine, she replied, her fingers tracing the edge of her coffee cup, unsure of why she felt such an immediate pull toward him. I was just thinking. Michael nodded slowly as if he understood all too well the weight of those words. Thinking about what? She paused, her gaze drifting back to the window as she considered how much of her life, of her heart, she was willing to share with a stranger. Her life, after all, had been splintered by too many things left unsaid, but there was something about Michael, something that made her feel like she could be honest. Perhaps it was the way his presence seemed to soften the edges of her world, or the way he looked at her, as if he wasn't simply seeing the surface, but something deeper, something real. About how strange it is, she said softly, to start over, to build a life from the ground up when everything you thought you knew has been torn apart. Michael's expression shifted, a subtle understanding passing across his face. He leaned back in his chair, the faintest hint of a smile playing at the corners of his lips. I know that feeling, he said quietly. Sometimes it feels like you've lost everything, and then you realize that what you thought was lost was only the beginning of something new. Jasmine's heart stilled at his words. How could he know she had never spoken to him before, and yet it felt as though he had glimpsed into the heart of her struggle. Her eyes met his, searching for any trace of insincerity, but all she found was genuine empathy. You seem to understand, she said, her voice barely a whisper. How do you know what it's like? Michael's gaze softened, and for a moment he didn't speak. Instead, he simply watched her, as though contemplating whether to share the secrets that swirled beneath the surface. Finally, he leaned in slightly, his voice lowering to a confidential tone. I've been through something similar, he confessed. Not in the same way, but in a way that changed everything for me. It took me years to realize that the things I thought were failures, the things I thought I had lost, were actually the things that led me to where I am today. I used to think I needed to control everything, but sometimes letting go is the only way to move forward. Jasmine swallowed, her pulse quickening. His words struck a chord deep within her, as though he were speaking not just to her, but for her. She had spent so long holding on to what she thought she needed, her career, her status, the life she had imagined with Adam. But now, in the quiet aftermath of it all, she was beginning to see that perhaps the things she had once clung to were not what mattered at all. Do you believe that? She asked, her voice trembling ever so slightly. Michael's lips quirked into a small smile, one that was both knowing and kind. I believe that letting go doesn't mean giving up. It means making room for something new. For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of the city outside, the distant hum of life moving forward. Jasmine felt a strange sense of peace settle over her, as though Michael's presence had grounded her in a way she hadn't known she needed. She was drawn to him not in a way that was driven by desire, but something more, a recognition that they had both been through the fire, that they understood each other in a way that was rare and profound. Sometimes I wonder if I'll ever stop feeling like I'm starting over. Jasmine admitted, her voice quiet, almost vulnerable. You will, Michael said, his tone reassuring, though his gaze remained intense. But first you have to accept that the process of starting over is not a loss. It's a chance to become who you were always meant to be. The pieces you thought were broken, they're the ones that will help you build something stronger. His words hung in the air, as soft and powerful as the evening breeze that began to drift through the cafe. Jasmine's heart stirred with something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. The world outside seemed a little brighter, a little less overwhelming. You're right, she said, her voice stronger now, infused with the realization that perhaps there was a path ahead of her, after all, even if she couldn't see it clearly just yet. Michael studied her for a long moment, a thoughtful expression crossing his face. You have a quiet strength, Jasmine. I think you'll be surprised by what you can accomplish once you stop holding on to what's already gone. She smiled softly, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. Thank you, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I think I needed to hear that. As the evening stretched on, their conversation flowed easily, as if they had known each other far longer than the brief span of time they had shared. There was something magnetic between them, a connection that neither could fully explain, but both felt deeply. When the time came to part ways, Michael's gaze lingered on hers for a moment longer than necessary, his eyes holding a promise she couldn't quite decipher. "I hope we'll meet again, Jasmine," he said, his voice low and sincere. Jasmine's heart skipped a beat, a feeling of anticipation stirring deep within her. "I think we will," she replied softly, a smile tugging at her lips. And as he disappeared into the night, the city still vibrant with life, Jasmine knew that her encounter with Michael Sullivan was no accident. It was the beginning of something new, something that would change the course of her journey in ways she hadn't yet begun to understand. The autumn air had settled into the bones of Brooklyn, cool and crisp, yet somehow still carrying the remnants of summer's warmth. It was the kind of evening that made you want to curl up with a blanket and a good book, the kind of night that promised solace after the noise of the world had quieted. For Jasmine, however, there was no comfort in stillness, no rest for the weary. She had learned that quiet could be more deafening than the loudest of storms. Tonight she sat at her small kitchen table, her fingers poised over the keyboard of her laptop, yet her mind was far away. The evening light from her window painted everything in a soft golden hue, and for a moment the city outside seemed distant, almost as though it were someone else's world. But there was no escaping her reality, not now. She had spent weeks, months, even searching for something that would make her feel whole again. In the aftermath of Adam's betrayal, she had been forced to find her place in a world that had felt so foreign, so empty. The memories of their life together, those early days when their love had felt like a promise, when their future seemed bright and secure, had become little more than dust in the wind. She had made peace with that. At least she had tried to. But there was a deeper, more urgent need inside her now, a need to rebuild herself, to carve out a space where no one, not even the ghosts of her past, could touch her. Her identity, once so entwined with Adam's world, had to be reformed. She had to become someone new, not just for her own survival, but for the future she was determined to create. And so she had made a decision she would change. Not just her name, but her life. Her fingers tapped lightly against the keyboard, pulling her back into the moment. She was drafting the final details for her new business, one that she would launch under the name Lena Carter. It wasn't just a name, it was her rebirth. She had chosen it carefully, each syllable like a piece of armor she would wear in this new chapter of her life. Lena, strong, simple, a name that had no ties to the past. Carter, a name she had pulled from the air, from the deep well of her imagination. It was hers now. It was all hers. The transformation was more than cosmetic. It was everything she had never been able to be before. Free, independent, powerful in her own right. She could no longer be the woman who had built her life around someone else's dreams. She had to be the woman who built her own. The world she had once inhabited, the polished halls of high society, had no place for her anymore. It had been a gilded cage, and she had been locked inside thinking it was everything she needed. But now, as Lena Carter, she would build a different empire, one forged from hard work, determination, and a deep understanding of what it meant to truly live. Not for anyone else, but for herself. A soft knock on the door broke her concentration, and she looked up startled. She hadn't expected anyone, and for a moment she wondered if it was some lingering shadow from her past. But no, the knock was too gentle, too familiar. "Lena." The voice that followed was kind, its timbre full of warmth. It was Naomi, her closest friend in the world, the one person who had stood by her since she'd first moved to Brooklyn. Lena stood up from the table, smoothing the edges of her sweater, the crisp fabric a reminder of how much she had changed. "Come in," she called out, her voice steady. The door creaked open and Naomi stepped inside, a familiar, comforting presence. She was holding a bag of groceries and her eyes softened when they met Lena's. Naomi had been the one person who had never questioned Lena's decision to leave everything behind. She had supported her when others had tried to convince her to go back to Adam, to try again, to fight for what had been lost. But Naomi had understood. She always had. "How's it going?" Naomi asked, her voice gentle but curious as she set the bag on the counter. Lena smiled, but it was a smile tinged with something deeper, something that had been buried for far too long. "It's coming together," she replied, her voice calm. "I'm getting everything in place for the new business. I think it's finally time to really do this." Naomi raised an eyebrow, her expression turning more serious. "You know you can do anything you put your mind to, Lena. You've got the talent, the drive. But more than that, you've got the strength to make it happen. This new identity, it's not just a name, is it?" Lena paused, her fingers brushing the edge of her coffee cup. Naomi's words hung in the air like a question Lena had been avoiding. The truth was, Naomi was right. It wasn't just a name. It was her whole life wrapped up in a new package, a new form. It was a promise to herself that she would never be the woman she had been with Adam, submissive, dependent, always second to someone else's vision. She would be Lena Carter, and Lena was free. Lena was whole. "It's not just a name," Lena said softly, her voice filled with an emotion she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. "It's me, the real me. I've spent so long trying to live up to other people's expectations, trying to be someone I thought I was supposed to be. But I'm not that person anymore. I've been reborn, and now I'm ready to take on the world as I am, without anyone else's shadow hanging over me." Naomi's gaze softened, her eyes bright with something close to pride. "I've never been prouder of you, Lena. You're a force to be reckoned with. You always have been. I know things haven't been easy, but you're stronger than you think. You're going to build something amazing." Lena's throat tightened at her friend's words, the weight of everything she had endured suddenly crashing down on her. But it wasn't a weight that would break her. It was a weight she had learned to carry, a weight that had made her who she was. She had faced the darkness of her past, and now she was stepping into the light. "I hope you're right," Lena said quietly, her heart filled with a quiet hope she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. "I don't know what the future holds, but I know this. I'm not afraid of it anymore." Naomi smiled, reaching out to squeeze her hand. "You never should have been afraid, Lena. You've got everything it takes to succeed, and you've got me." Lena looked at Naomi, gratitude flooding her chest. "Thank you for everything, for being here when I needed you most." The two women stood there for a long moment, silent but not uncomfortable. It was a silence filled with understanding, with the kind of bond that only years of friendship could forge. And in that silence, Lena realized something important. The past didn't define her. The future was wide open, waiting for her to claim it. As the evening settled around them, Lena returned to the kitchen table, her mind focused once again on the task at hand. She began typing out the final details for her business, her fingers flying across the keys with newfound purpose. This wasn't just about a new name, a new identity. It was about reclaiming the life she had once dreamed of, the life she would now create for herself. Lena Carter was born of strength, of heartache, of resilience. And with every decision she made, every step she took, she knew she was closer to becoming the woman she was always meant to be. The world was hers to conquer, and she would do it on her own terms. The future was waiting, and Lena was ready. The city of New York never slowed. It was a perpetual dance of movement, of energy, of untold stories, each corner of the city whispering a different tale. But for Adam Montgomery, it was a reminder of a relentless, unfinished chase. The cacophony of the city outside his office window, the rush of traffic, the hum of life had all faded into a dull background noise, a mere distraction to his ever-consuming thoughts. He could feel the weight of each passing day as it dragged on, and every moment spent without her, without Jasmine, felt like a thread being pulled tighter and tighter. He had built empires, amassed wealth beyond measure, but nothing could fill the void left by her absence, and nothing, not even his power or influence, could bring her back. Adam leaned back in his leather chair, his gaze fixed on the skyline stretching out before him. The sun was dipping low, casting an orange glow over the city, but he barely noticed. His mind was far away, traveling through the maze of memories, through the moments he'd taken for granted. He had failed her, he knew that now. He had taken everything she had given him, twisted it and broken it, And when she had finally left taking with her the pieces of him that had once been whole, he was left with nothing but regret, nothing but a hollow ache that seemed to grow with each passing day. His fingers drummed absent-mindedly on the edge of his desk, his eyes still distant. He had tried to reach her to make her come back, but it was as though she had vanished into thin air, like smoke dissipating in the wind. No matter how many calls he made, no matter how many investigators he hired, he couldn't find her. She was gone, and the uncertainty of it gnawed at him like a constant ache in his chest. A soft knock at the door broke through his reverie, and Adam looked up, the faintest flicker of irritation passing across his face. He had no patience left for anything or anyone that wasn't connected to Jasmine. But when the door opened, it wasn't one of his assistants or business partners. It was Detective Collins, a man whose services Adam had come to rely on in the weeks since Jasmine had disappeared. "Mr. Montgomery," Collins said, his voice steady but laced with something that Adam couldn't quite place. "We've got news." Adam straightened in his chair, his heart giving a small, unbidden lurch. "What is it?" His voice was tight, his fingers now gripping the edge of the desk as he leaned forward. "Tell me you found her." Collins hesitated, his eyes flickering with something like hesitation before he spoke. "We've traced her to Brooklyn." Adam's breath caught in his throat. "Brooklyn?" He repeated the word, heavy in the air between them. He had always known that Jasmine had grown fond of that borough, its quaint charm, its slower pace, the escape it offered from the polished, suffocating world they had inhabited. But Brooklyn was a world apart, a place where she could truly disappear if she chose to. She's been living there under a new name. Collins continued, his voice steady, but there was an edge to it now. "Lena Carter. That's what we found. It's a complete rebranding, new identity, new life." Adam's mind reeled. "Lena Carter," he muttered, tasting the name on his tongue. It was as though she had shed everything, not just her past, but the very person she had once been with him. He had known deep down that this would be the result of his betrayal. Jasmine Lena now had started over. She had built something entirely new without him. And yet the idea of her living without him, of her having a life that didn't include him, sent a sharp pang of jealousy and regret through his chest. "Do we know where exactly in Brooklyn she is?" Adam asked, his voice betraying none of the turmoil that raged inside him. Collins nodded. "We have an address, but she's careful. She's not taking any risks. No one knows much about her, and she keeps a low profile. We're still digging." Adam's eyes narrowed. He had given them ample time, ample resources, but it seemed as though every lead had turned cold. Every clue had slipped through their fingers. He could feel his frustration mounting. "We don't have time for digging, Collins," he said, his voice tight, the pressure mounting. "I need answers. I need her back." "Sir," Collins said, a note of caution entering his voice. "We've traced the woman she's become, but this is a delicate situation. If she wants to disappear, truly disappear, there's little anyone can do. We'll find her, but pushing too hard might make her slip away again." Adam clenched his jaw, his fists curling at his sides. He had spent too many nights wondering where she was, whether she was safe, whether she had forgiven him, whether she even thought of him at all. He had known from the very moment she had walked out of their life together that he could not live without her. He had made a mistake, the mistake, and now he had to fix it. He would fix it. He had to. He stood up, his chair scraping sharply against the polished floor. "Do what you have to do," he said, his voice steady but laced with a dangerous edge. "I want to know where she is. No more waiting." Collins nodded, but there was something in his eyes, a flicker of doubt, perhaps even concern. "Understood, sir, but be careful. This isn't just about finding her, it's about handling it carefully. If she's truly starting over, we don't want to drive her further away." Adam's eyes flashed with a mix of anger and determination. "I'm not afraid of that." Collins met his gaze, then gave a small nod and left the room without another word. But Adam's mind was already far ahead, spinning with plans, strategies, and the singular goal of bringing Jasmine Lena back into his life. He couldn't let her go. he wouldn't. The next few weeks passed in a blur of phone calls, emails, and briefings. Adam's life was once again consumed by the chase, the pursuit of a woman who had once been his everything. The city, which had felt so foreign and distant to him in the early days of their separation, now seemed like the very air he breathed. He haunted the streets of Brooklyn, his mind racing with every possible scenario of where she could be, what she was doing. Every corner he turned felt like it might hold the answer. But despite his best efforts, the answers remained elusive. The name Lena Carter had no footprints to follow, no easy trail to follow. Jasmine or Lena was a ghost, and the closer he got, the further she seemed to slip through his fingers. It was only when the investigators brought him another breakthrough, her involvement in a local community project, that Adam began to sense a change in the air. It was small, just a hint of something, but it was enough to ignite a flicker of hope in his chest. The people she had helped, the causes she had thrown herself into, they were all parts of a new life, a life without him. But even in the face of these obstacles, Adam knew one thing: he wouldn't stop. Not until he found her, not until she was back where she belonged by his side, in the life they had once built together. He had no idea what this new version of Jasmine, this Lena, had become, but he knew that she was his to claim. He had lost her once, but he would not lose her again. The search continued, relentless and all-consuming, as Adam prepared for the day when their paths would cross once more. And when they did, he would be ready to do whatever it took to make her his again. The early evening fog hung low over Brooklyn, its soft fingers curling through the streets like a lover's embrace. There was something magical about it, as though the city itself had slowed, giving her the space to breathe, to think, to feel. For Jasmine, the fog had become a symbol of her own confusion, a cloak that veiled the past while leaving everything else in sharp, painful clarity. She stood at the window of her modest apartment, her hands resting lightly on the cool glass, her reflection merging with the blur of the streetlights outside. The days had passed in a steady rhythm, work meetings, the quiet moments when she allowed herself to rest. And yet beneath the surface, the yearning had not faded. It lingered, a delicate ache she could not shake. The life she had built in the shadows of her former existence was strong, but there were pieces of her heart that still trembled, still sought something more. Her thoughts had often returned to him, Michael Sullivan, the man who had appeared like a breath of fresh air, his presence a gentle storm that swept through her carefully constructed walls. It wasn't just his charm, though it was undeniable, nor his effortless elegance that had drawn her in. It was his quiet understanding, the way he had seen through her defenses, with such ease as though he had known all along what she had been running from. He had offered her a chance to open up, to trust again, but each time the possibility had seemed too dangerous, too fragile. She had been burned before. She was not ready to make herself vulnerable again. And yet the pull of his gaze, the warmth of his words had left a mark on her heart that she could no longer ignore. He was everything she needed, yet, at the same time, everything that scared her. It had been easier to lose herself in the whirlwind of her business, in the day-to-day struggle of building something from the ground up. But with Michael, the future felt like an unknown terrain, unpredictable, exciting, but fraught with peril. It was during one of these quiet nights, when the fog had softened the world around her, that the doorbell rang. The sudden sound startled her, the faintest ripple of anxiety stirring in her chest. She wasn't expecting anyone. No one except Naomi had ever come to visit her here in Brooklyn. She wasn't sure she was ready for anyone else to. And yet there was a strange certainty that pressed against her, an unspoken knowing that whoever was on the other side of the door would change everything. She opened the door to find Michael standing there, his coat draped elegantly over his arm, his eyes catching the streetlights in a way that made him seem almost otherworldly. The air around him seemed to shift, as though the space itself was charged with the weight of what was about to unfold. "Michael," she breathed, her voice a mix of surprise and something softer, something unspoken. "Jasmine," he said her name with the quiet intimacy of someone who had known her for far longer than the brief moments they had shared. His gaze softened as he looked at her, taking in the subtle change in her expression, the guarded way she stood in the doorway. "I hope I'm not intruding." She shook her head, her heart fluttering in her chest. "No, it's just unexpected," she said, stepping aside to let him in. The warmth of his presence seemed to fill the room, and she had to steady herself to remain composed. But in truth, she felt anything but steady. The last time they had spoken, she had told herself that it was for the best, that she couldn't afford to get involved, not when so much of her heart was still broken, still raw from the betrayal she had endured. But Michael's quiet persistence had drawn her in. His quiet way of listening, of understanding, had reminded her of the kind of love she had once thought possible. She had spent so long building walls around her heart, telling herself that she was better off alone, that the risk of love was not worth the reward. But now, standing before him, all those walls felt like nothing more than fragile glass, ready to shatter with a single touch. He smiled softly, his expression full of unspoken understanding. "I've been thinking a lot about our conversation the other night," he said, his voice low and rich like velvet sliding across her skin. "And I understand why you're hesitant, but I also believe that we can't keep living in the shadows of our past forever. Sometimes we have to step into the light, even when it's scary." Jasmine swallowed the words she had longed to hear, now ringing in her ears. She had been avoiding the truth, avoiding the feelings that had begun to grow inside her. She had known from the moment she met Michael that there was something between them, something undeniable. But she had been afraid. Afraid of repeating the same mistakes, afraid of losing herself in someone else again. But his words made her question everything. She turned away from him, her eyes searching the room as though the answers might be written on the walls. "I don't know if I can do this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I can trust again. Not after everything that's happened." Michael was quiet for a long moment, his gaze never leaving her. When he spoke, his voice was gentle but unwavering. "I'm not asking you to trust me all at once, Jasmine. Trust is something that takes time, something that grows with each moment we share. All I'm asking is for a chance to show you that you're not alone in this, that you don't have to be afraid." The words hung in the air between them, a delicate tension that vibrated with the weight of their shared pasts, their hopes, their fears. Jasmine felt a flutter in her chest, a stirring deep within her heart. She had spent so long running from love, from trust, from everything that had once seemed so easy, so effortless. But now, standing here with Michael, she wondered if she had been wrong to close herself off, wrong to believe that love could never be safe, never be real. "I don't know what this is," Jasmine said, her voice trembling with emotion she could no longer hide. "I don't know if I can let go of the past. I don't know if I can open my heart again." Michael stepped closer, his presence filling the space between them with a warmth that reached into her very soul. He reached out his hand, gently brushing against hers, and for the first time in what felt like years, Jasmine didn't pull away. Instead, she allowed herself to feel the warmth of his touch. The way it grounded her made her feel less alone. "You don't have to have all the answers right now," Michael said softly. "You just have to take the next step. I'm here, Jasmine. I'm not going anywhere." Her breath caught in her throat, her heart pounding with the weight of his words, with the possibility of something new, something real. For the first time in a long while, Jasmine felt as though she was standing at the edge of something that could change her life. The past, with its shadows and its betrayals, still lingered behind her, but ahead of her was a road she had never dared to walk before. And for the first time in years, she found herself willing to take that step. As Michael's hand rested gently in hers, she realized that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't ready to close herself off completely. Maybe, just maybe, she was ready to begin again. But the road ahead was not without its challenges. The ghosts of her past were not easily exorcised, and the fear of repeating history weighed heavily on her heart. She had to be certain, had to be sure that this path was one she could walk with Michael without losing herself again. But in this moment, standing on the precipice of what felt like the beginning of something beautiful, Jasmine knew one thing for certain: she was at a crossroads. And for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid to choose which road to take. The heavy rain had begun to fall softly in Brooklyn, a quiet, rhythmic patter against the windows. It was the kind of evening that made the world outside seem distant, as though it existed in a separate, softer reality, separate from the turmoil that swirled within her. Jasmine stood by the window in her small living room, her gaze unfocused as she watched the rain blur the city beyond. She hadn't expected the storm, but it seemed fitting somehow, like the turbulence that had settled in her heart ever since Michael had walked into her life. She had thought for a brief moment that maybe, just maybe, she could leave her past behind. She had begun to let herself believe in something new, in the possibility of trust and love again. Michael's presence had been a gentle anchor, a balm to her wounds, and for the first time in years she had begun to feel a stirring of hope. She had started to open herself to the idea that perhaps love didn't have to be fraught with betrayal and pain. Perhaps it could be gentle. Perhaps it could be safe. But tonight, as the rain tapped lightly on the glass, the knock at the door shattered that fragile peace. It was not the soft rattle of an unexpected visitor, but something louder, more insistent. Three sharp raps that seemed to pierce the air around her. Jasmine's heart skipped a beat as she turned toward the door, her pulse quickening. She had been avoiding the outside world in many ways. Too many reminders, too many possibilities of things she wasn't ready to face. Her fingers tightened against the edge of the windowsill, and for a long moment she simply stood there frozen. The knock came again, this time louder, as if demanding an answer. There was no mistaking it now. She knew who it was. The man she had tried to forget, the man she had run from, the man who had been the catalyst for everything she had fled from Adam. Her breath caught in her throat. Every instinct told her to ignore it, to close the door to the past and keep moving forward. But the door seemed to hold her captive, as though a force beyond her control was pulling her toward it. She moved slowly, her legs trembling beneath her as she crossed the room. For a brief moment she closed her eyes, gathering herself, letting the silence of the rain fill her senses. She had been preparing herself for this, hadn't she? Hadn't she known that the past would never leave her alone? That Adam would return when she least expected it, pulling her back into a life she had worked so hard to escape. Taking a deep breath, she reached for the door handle and opened it, her heart racing in her chest. Adam stood there, drenched from the rain, his eyes wild, like a man who had been searching for something lost. His dark hair clung to his forehead, his suit soaked through, but it was his gaze, intense, desperate, that made Jasmine's breath falter. There was something in his eyes that she had once recognized: regret. But it was too late for regrets. "Jasmine," he said, his voice low, filled with a quiet urgency. "I need to talk to you." She didn't invite him in. She didn't need to. She stood in the doorway, holding the threshold between the life she had built and the past that had shattered her. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice steady, despite the storm of emotions that surged inside her. "I couldn't stay away," Adam replied, his voice almost pleading. He reached out a hand as though to bridge the space between them, but Jasmine stepped back, a barrier now between them that neither words nor gestures could cross. "I thought you had everything you wanted, Adam," she said, her voice growing colder. "You have your empire, your life, your freedom. Why come here now? Why now, after everything?" Adam's jaw tightened, his eyes darkening with a mixture of regret and something deeper, something desperate. "I've lost everything, Jasmine. I've lost you, and without you, nothing else matters. You're the one thing I can't fix. You're the one thing I can't buy back. I've made so many mistakes, and I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I can't live with the way I left things. I need you to know how sorry I am." His words hung in the air, thick with the weight of years of deceit, of betrayal. Jasmine's hands tightened at her sides, and the sting of old wounds flared beneath the surface of her skin. She had once loved this man so fiercely, so completely. She had believed in the life they had created together. But Adam had broken that belief, and in doing so had taken a piece of her that she would never get back. "You never thought about what I needed," she said quietly, her voice barely a whisper. "You never thought about me at all, Adam. Not really. You were too busy with your empire, with everything but us. You wanted me to be a part of your world, but only on your terms. And when I stopped fitting into that picture, you threw me away. The words were like knives cutting through the silence, cutting through the distance that had grown between them. But they were the truth. And the truth, no matter how painful, was something she had denied herself for far too long. Adam's face twisted with emotion. His eyes burned with something he couldn't hide, anguish, regret, and a glimmer of fear. Fear of losing her forever. I know, he said, his voice raw. I was wrong. I see that now. I see how much I've hurt you, and I can't take it back. But I can't let you go, Jasmine. I can't let this be the end. Jasmine shook her head slowly, a bitter smile tugging at her lips. You don't get to decide that, she said softly. Not anymore. You lost that right when you chose her over me, when you chose your business over us. I've spent too long picking up the pieces of my life, rebuilding everything you destroyed. I can't go back to that. For a long moment, there was nothing but the sound of the rain, the quiet rhythm of a storm that had mirrored the turmoil within her for so long. Adam stood there, his face a study of frustration and heartbreak, but Jasmine stood firm. She had learned to stand on her own 2 feet, learned that her happiness didn't depend on anyone else's approval or forgiveness. She had learned to live for herself, for the woman she was becoming, not the woman Adam had tried to shape her into. I'm sorry, Adam said again, his voice breaking as he stepped back, his eyes never leaving her. But I will never stop loving you. I will never stop trying to fix what I broke. Jasmine closed the door softly, her hands trembling as she turned the lock. The space between them had closed, but the gulf between the life she had once known and the life she was now building could never be bridged. As she leaned back against the door, her breath shallow, her heart heavy, she knew this Adam had returned to her life, but his return had only reinforced what she already knew. The past was gone. The love they had once shared had died with the lies, the deceit. And while she could never erase the pain of it, she had learned one undeniable truth: she would never again allow herself to be defined by someone else's mistakes. The storm raged on outside, but Jasmine stood in the stillness of her apartment, the weight of her choices settling around her. The past was gone, and with it she was free to become something new, something whole. The door was closed, and with it Adam's shadow faded into the storm. Now all she had to do was learn to trust herself again, and for the first time she felt ready to begin. The cold winter air had settled over Brooklyn, weaving through the streets with a bite that made the evenings seem sharper, more defined. It was a time of year when everything felt suspended, waiting for the warmth of spring, waiting for something to break through the frozen silence. And yet Jasmine Wright had come to understand that it wasn't the seasons that determined when change would come. It was the moments in between, the quiet decisions made in the corners of her heart, where transformation began. She had spent the past few weeks in a state of quiet introspection, unsure of what to do with the space that Adam's sudden reappearance had created in her life. The shock of his return had left her reeling, but it had also forced her to confront something she had been running from for so long: the possibility of moving on. Moving on from him. Moving on from the past that had held her captive. Sitting in her cozy apartment, the dim glow of the city's skyline barely visible through the rain-soaked windows, Jasmine allowed herself a moment of reflection. The storm outside mirrored the turmoil that had settled within her. There had been a time when she would have opened the door to Adam, let him back in with the hope that they could rebuild, that love could somehow erase the pain. But not anymore. She had learned something about herself in the months since their parting. She had learned that her love, her true love, could not be a thing of desperation, a thing of longing for something that was never truly hers. It had to be a love built on trust, on partnership, on equality. And Adam had never understood that. Yet despite this newfound strength, there was still a small part of her that longed for the kind of love they had once shared, the moments of quiet intimacy, the times when their hearts had aligned in ways that felt effortless. She had tried to ignore it, bury it beneath the growing success of her new business, beneath the determination to rebuild her life. but the heart doesn't forget so easily. It was then that a knock came at the door, a quiet yet deliberate sound that disrupted the stillness of her thoughts. She didn't need to ask who it was. She already knew. Michael. It had been a few days since they last spoke. After that night when he had stood in her living room, offering his steady presence, he had given her the space she had needed to think. He understood the weight of the decisions she was facing, understood the fragile nature of trust, and the risk of giving away pieces of yourself that you weren't sure you were ready to share. Jasmine took a breath, a sudden nervousness fluttering in her chest. She wasn't ready for this moment when everything could shift. She wasn't sure if she was ready to take the step to allow herself the possibility of falling for someone again. But she knew deep down that this was the moment she had to face. She could no longer stand still in the shadows of her past, afraid to move forward. She had to choose, and that choice was one she could not put off any longer. With a quiet sigh, she opened the door. Michael stood there, his dark coat dripping with the remnants of the rain, his hair damp, but his expression calm, steady. His eyes, those blue searching eyes, met hers, and for a moment neither of them spoke. The air between them was charged electric, as if they both knew that something had shifted. That this moment was not just a meeting, but a turning point. Jasmine, he said, his voice low, but there was a note of something unspoken beneath the surface. A question, a hope. Michael, she replied, stepping back to let him in, her heart pounding in her chest. As he stepped into her apartment, the warmth of his presence seemed to fill the room, pushing away the chill of the rain, the chill of her doubt. He looked around, his gaze lingering on the small, carefully curated space. "It's nice," he said, his smile soft, though there was an underlying tension in his posture. "Thank you," she said, walking toward the small table near the window where she had been working. Her fingers ran lightly over the edges of the papers there, as if seeking some form of comfort in the routine of her work. "I've been making a few changes, settling in. It feels good to be in control of my own space for the first time in a long while." Michael nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I can see that," he said quietly. "I'm glad you're doing well, but I came here tonight because I think we need to talk. I think we need to talk about what's next for us." Jasmine felt a sudden surge of emotion at his words. It wasn't just the words themselves, it was the way they were spoken with such care, such consideration. He wasn't pushing her, wasn't demanding that she make a choice right now. He was simply offering her the space to make that decision herself. "I'm not sure I'm ready for this," Jasmine admitted, her voice wavering slightly as she turned to face him. "Not yet. I'm still figuring out who I am, without him, without everything that happened with Adam. I don't know if I can trust anyone again. Not yet." Michael took a step forward, his expression softening. "I understand," he said. "I know that what happened with Adam has shaped you in ways that go far deeper than anything I could know. And I'm not asking you to forget that, or to rush into something you're not ready for. But I need you to know something. I'm not asking for all of you right now. I'm not asking for your heart or your trust all at once. I'm simply asking for a chance to show you that I'm here for you, and that I can be trusted." The quiet sincerity in his words struck something deep within her. For the first time, Jasmine realized that Michael wasn't offering her some perfect, idealized version of love. He was offering her his presence, steady, calm, real. He wasn't asking her to forget the pain of the past. He was simply offering her a safe place to land when she was ready. She took a deep breath, the weight of her decision settling heavily on her shoulders. This was the turning point, wasn't it? She had stood at the crossroads for so long, afraid to take the next step. But here was Michael, waiting, patient, steady, offering her a new beginning. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't without risk. But it was real, and it was hers to decide. She met his gaze, her eyes softening as the floodgates within her heart began to open just a little. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice quiet. "I'm scared of letting myself love again. I don't want to get hurt. I don't want to lose myself in someone else." Michael smiled, then a soft, understanding smile. "You don't have to lose yourself, Jasmine. Not with me. You never will." Her heart fluttered at his words, a warmth spreading through her chest. The uncertainty that had gripped her for so long began to ebb away, replaced by something else, something new, something that felt like the first breath after a long, dark winter. Jasmine stepped closer to him, her heart racing with something that she couldn't quite name. She wasn't sure what the future held. She wasn't sure if she was ready to open herself up completely. But in this moment, standing before Michael, she knew one thing for certain: she couldn't stay in the past forever. And for the first time, she wasn't afraid to take the next step. "I don't know what this is," she whispered, her hand brushing lightly against his, "but I think I'm ready to find out." Michael's eyes softened, and for a moment, all the noise of the world outside, all the confusion and pain of the past seemed to fade into the background. There was only the two of them standing together on the precipice of something new. And in that silence, they both knew that this was the moment when everything could change. Slowly, as though giving her time to pull away, Michael leaned in, his lips brushing against hers in a kiss that was soft, tentative, yet full of promise. Jasmine closed her eyes, allowing herself to be swept away by the warmth of the moment, by the quiet certainty that for the first time in years she wasn't alone. The turning point had come. And in the delicate, tender moments that followed, Jasmine knew that this was the beginning of something beautiful, something she could never have imagined until now. The days that followed the quiet turning point between Jasmine and Michael felt both infinite and fleeting. The distance between the woman she had been and the woman she was becoming seemed to stretch out before her like a vast horizon full of possibility and the strange weight of uncertainty. Every time she looked at Michael, the pull of something deeper stirred in her chest, something she had spent years trying to suppress. He was her anchor now, the steady force in her life that reminded her what it felt like to be seen, to be valued, and for the first time in years to feel safe. But safety, she had come to realize, could be a double-edged sword. One afternoon, as the sun began to dip low, painting the sky in hues of purple and orange, Michael arrived at her apartment with a look on his face that unsettled her. He had a certain way of carrying himself when he was about to say something serious, something that required her full attention. The air around them felt charged, as though something unsaid lingered between them. "Jasmine," Michael began, his voice carrying a weight that immediately caught her attention. "We need to talk." Jasmine closed the door behind him, the quiet thud of it echoing in the empty room. She watched him, her brow furrowing slightly. "What's wrong?" He met her gaze, his eyes unreadable. "I've been thinking about what we've talked about us, and about what comes next. The truth is, I can't stay here in this limbo without knowing where we're headed. And there's something I need to offer you. Something dangerous." The word dangerous hung in the air like a warning, sending an involuntary shiver down her spine. Jasmine's pulse quickened. She took a step back, trying to process the weight of his words, but she couldn't ignore the instinctive sense that she was about to hear something that would change everything between them. "Dangerous," she repeated, her voice hesitant. "What do you mean?" Michael exhaled slowly, as though gathering the courage to speak what had been weighing on his heart. "I'm offering you a chance to come with me, to leave Brooklyn, to leave everything behind and join me in a new venture I'm starting. It's not just a business, it's everything I've been building for years, and I can't do it alone. I want you to be by my side, Jasmine. I want you to build it with me." His words lingered between them, heavy and intense, and Jasmine found herself struggling to find the ground beneath her feet. The offer was impossible to ignore. She had spent months rebuilding herself, had fought so hard for independence, for the chance to make something of her own. And now Michael was offering her everything she had dreamed of: partnership, growth, success, but also something more. Something she couldn't name but felt in the way her heart stirred in her chest. "I don't understand," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, her mind racing. "You're asking me to join you in something that could change everything. Everything I've built here. Everything I've worked for. You want me to leave Brooklyn, to leave my life behind." Michael stepped closer, his eyes softening with a mix of longing and something darker, something she couldn't quite place. "I'm asking you to take a risk with me. I'm asking you to trust me, to trust us. We've already crossed so many lines, Jasmine, and yet I can't help but feel that this is where it's supposed to go. But it's a dangerous proposition. You know that. If you accept, you'll be stepping into something bigger than anything we've talked about. I can't promise it will be easy. I can't promise there won't be complications, but I can promise that we'll be in it together. Jasmine took a step back, her breath catching in her throat. The world outside the window had turned darker, and the city's pulse seemed to grow louder in her ears. Her mind whirred, turning over every word he had said. This was it. This was the moment she had been unknowingly waiting for, the moment where she would be asked to choose not just for herself, but for both of them. The choice between safety and risk. The choice between a new future with him and the stability she had fought so hard to create. Michael, she began, but the words stuck in her throat. She wanted to say something that would make sense of the chaos swirling inside her, but she couldn't find the right words. Everything she thought she knew about love, about partnership, was shifting beneath her like quicksand. She was afraid of losing herself again, afraid of putting her future into someone else's hands, no matter how much she trusted him. He reached out, taking her hand gently in his. The touch was warm, familiar, but also filled with an undercurrent of something deeper, something that made her chest tighten with the intensity of it. Jasmine, I can't do this without you. I can't build what I need to build without you by my side. You are the key to everything I've envisioned. But I need to know if you're willing to take this risk with me. If you're willing to step into a future that may not be easy, but will be everything we've ever dreamed of. The silence between them stretched long, both of them frozen in the tension of the moment. Her fingers tightened around his, and she found herself fighting the urge to pull away, to retreat into the life she had built for herself. She had always been able to go it alone, had always believed that she could handle anything on her own. But the offer Michael had laid before her was a challenge, a proposition that demanded more from her than she had ever been willing to give. I've spent so long building this life, she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. I've fought so hard for my independence. For the first time in my life, I feel like I'm in control of my own future. And now you're asking me to risk it all, to risk everything for this, for us. Michael's expression softened, his thumb brushing gently across her knuckles, as though trying to soothe the storm of emotions swirling within her. I'm not asking you to give up everything you've worked for, he said, his voice calm, but filled with an urgency that mirrored the pulse in her chest. I'm asking you to share it with me, to build something together, to be part of something bigger than both of us. I promise you, Jasmine, that this is about us, about what we can create together. But if you're not ready to take that leap, then I'll wait. I'll give you the time you need. But I can't promise I'll wait forever. Jasmine felt a shiver run through her at his words. There was something undeniable in the way he spoke, in the way he looked at her, as though the future was already written between them. She wanted to trust him. She wanted to believe in the future he was offering her, but there was still so much fear, so much uncertainty. She had already given so much of herself to someone else once. The idea of doing it again, of risking everything, felt like an impossible choice. Her breath caught, and for a long moment she simply looked at him. The weight of the decision pressed on her chest, squeezing out the air in her lungs. Michael was offering her everything she had longed for, everything she had been too afraid to want. He was offering her a future with him, a future where they could build something real, something lasting. But in that offer lay the danger of losing herself, the danger of surrendering to something that might shatter her once again. I don't know, she whispered, her voice breaking with the weight of the uncertainty. I don't know if I can make that choice. Not yet. Michael's eyes softened and he pulled her closer, wrapping his arms around her in a gesture that was both comforting and desperate. Take your time, Jasmine. I'm not going anywhere. But when you're ready to take that risk to build something real, something lasting, I'll be here, waiting. And in that moment, as she rested her head against his chest, she realized that the choice was hers to make. The dangerous proposition was not just about their future. it was about her own. And as the storm raged on outside, Jasmine knew that soon she would have to decide whether to risk everything for a future that held more promise than she had ever dared to imagine. The morning sun rose over Brooklyn, spilling its golden light across the rooftops, but inside Jasmine's apartment, the world felt far darker. The faint hum of the city, usually a comforting backdrop to her thoughts, now only added to the weight pressing on her chest. The choices before her had become like a dense fog clouding her vision, blurring the path she had once so clearly seen. It had been days since Michael's proposition, the offer of a future that was so different from anything she had ever imagined. He had given her space as he promised, but the quiet between them was no longer comfortable. It was a silence filled with questions. His patience, his unwavering belief in what they could build together, had only made her heartache more acute. She wasn't sure whether it was the fear of the unknown or the fear of losing herself again that left her feeling so torn. She stood by the window, her arms wrapped around herself as though to ward off the cold that had settled in her bones. The rain had stopped, but the gray sky outside mirrored her emotions, heavy, uncertain, without the promise of clarity. Jasmine had built a life for herself here, a life independent of Adam, independent of anyone who might try to define her, and yet there was always something missing. Michael had awakened a longing inside her, a longing not just for partnership, but for something more, someone who saw her not as a survivor of a broken love, but as someone worthy of a love that could be built from the ground up without the baggage of the past. The idea of moving forward with him, of stepping into a future she could share with him, was both exhilarating and terrifying. And yet the question lingered. Was she ready? Could she risk everything again? Was she strong enough to take that leap into the unknown? Her mind turned to Adam, and the familiar ache of what had been lost rose within her. She had once loved him with a ferocity she could never have imagined. He had been her partner, her equal, or so she had thought. His betrayal had taught her more than she had wanted to know about trust, about herself, about how love could be both a gift and a weapon. And now, after all this time, he was still a shadow in her heart, one that would not fade. But Michael had entered her life with the quiet grace of a man who understood both the power of silence and the value of patience. Where Adam had demanded, Michael had offered. Where Adam had seen her as a means to an end, Michael had seen her as an equal. Where Adam had broken her, Michael had given her the space to heal. Yet she still hesitated. A soft knock at the door broke through her thoughts, and Jasmine froze. She had been expecting this moment, yet the sound of it still made her heart race. It was as though her world had come to a standstill. She had been holding her breath for so long, but now at the precipice of her decision, she was afraid to exhale. Slowly, she made her way to the door, each step feeling like 1,000 miles. She opened it to find Michael standing there, his coat draped across his arm, his expression guarded as though he were waiting for her to make the first move. He had come not with urgency, but with a calm patience that both comforted and unsettled her. "Jasmine," he said softly, his voice a low murmur that seemed to reverberate through her chest. He looked at her with such intensity that she almost wanted to look away, but she held his gaze. "We need to talk." She nodded, stepping aside to allow him in. The room was dim, the heavy curtains drawn against the morning light, and for a moment everything felt suspended, as though the air itself was waiting for her to make a decision. Michael closed the door behind him and turned toward her. He didn't rush to speak, giving her a moment to gather herself. But Jasmine knew she had known the moment he stepped across the threshold that the time for waiting was over. This was it. This was the moment where she had to choose. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice still soft but firm with resolve, "about what we've talked about what you're asking of me and what I'm asking of you." Jasmine swallowed her throat dry. "And what is it that you're asking of me, Michael?" He looked at her, his eyes searching as though he were trying to read the very essence of who she was. "I'm asking you to trust me. I'm asking you to trust us. I know that the idea of moving forward with me is terrifying. I know that the past looms over us both, and I know that love for you must feel like a risk you're not ready to take. But I need to know if you're willing to take that risk with me. I need to know if you're ready to let me be part of your life, to build a life together." Jasmine closed her eyes, her chest tightening with the weight of his words. The idea of building something, of trusting someone so completely, was both beautiful and devastating. She had spent so much time on her own, learning to be independent, learning to rely only on herself. She had become strong, resilient in a way she hadn't thought possible. And now Michael was offering her the chance to surrender some of that strength to share it with him. But was she ready? She took a breath, feeling the air fill her lungs, as though she were finally allowing herself to breathe. "I've built this life, Michael," she said quietly, her voice trembling with the vulnerability she had spent so long hiding. "I've built it from the ground up, and I've worked so hard to make it mine. I've fought for my independence, fought for my peace, and now you're asking me to risk it all, to risk everything." He stepped closer, his hand reaching out for hers, his touch warm against her skin. "I'm not asking you to give up anything, Jasmine. I'm asking you to build something with me. I'm asking you to trust that we can create something better together. Not perfect, not without flaws, but real and ours." The warmth of his hand in hers steadied her, but the tremor in her heart refused to quiet. She pulled her hand from his gently, though it wasn't an action filled with rejection. It was a moment of pause, of the heart searching for something it couldn't yet find. "I don't know if I can do this, Michael," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I don't know if I'm ready to love again. Not like that. Not after everything I've been through." His gaze softened, but there was a quiet intensity in his eyes that held her in place. "Jasmine," he said gently, his voice filled with something she couldn't name. "You're not alone in this. You won't ever be again. Not with me." The weight of his words pressed down on her chest like an unspoken promise. She closed her eyes, the truth of it slipping through her defenses, and in that moment she realized something. The choice she had to make wasn't just about Michael. It wasn't just about them. It was about her, about who she was now, and what she was willing to risk to move forward. She had spent so much of her life carrying the weight of the past, but the past, as painful as it had been, had made her who she was today. It had shown her strength. She didn't know she had resilience she hadn't known was possible. But now, standing before Michael, she understood that in order to move forward, in order to embrace the future, she had to let go of the past. She had to choose to trust. And so with a deep breath, Jasmine opened her eyes and met his gaze once more. "I'm scared, Michael," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm scared that if I trust you, I'll lose myself. I'm scared that I'll make the wrong choice." Michael stepped closer, his hand reaching out once again. But this time Jasmine didn't pull away. Instead, she took his hand, her fingers intertwining with his in a gesture that felt like a quiet promise. "You won't lose yourself, Jasmine," he whispered. "I'll never ask you to give up who you are. I'll only ask that you let me be part of it." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The world outside seemed to hold its breath, as though waiting for her to make the decision that would change everything. And as she stood there, her heart beating loudly in her chest, Jasmine knew that this was the moment. The moment where she would choose to trust, to step into the unknown, and to finally allow herself the chance at a love that wasn't broken, a love that wasn't defined by what had come before, a love that was simply theirs. "I'm ready," she said softly, her voice steady with the weight of her decision. "I'm ready to choose us." The first light of dawn crept through the curtains, casting a soft glow across the room. But it was the quiet, peaceful hum of the city that reached Jasmine's ears. The streets of Brooklyn seemed almost still in the early hours, as though they too were holding their breath in the stillness of the morning. Her apartment was a quiet sanctuary, now the echoes of the past softened by the warmth of the future that was slowly unfurling before her. She had made the decision, the choice to step forward with Michael. And while the uncertainty still lingered, a flicker of hope had begun to take root deep within her chest. It wasn't the kind of hope that promised a perfect future, free from struggle, free from pain. No, this was something far more fragile and yet infinitely stronger, the hope that she could love again and be loved in a way that would let her rise from the ashes of the life she had once known. Jasmine stood by the window, her fingers lightly tracing the edges of the glass as the morning light bathed the city in warmth. There were still remnants of the past of Adam, of the life she had fought to escape. She could feel them lurking just beneath the surface like shadows that refused to fade. But as the sun rose inch by inch, she felt the weight of those shadows begin to lift, and with it a sense of something new, something she hadn't allowed herself to believe in for so long. A soft knock at the door broke the silence, and for a moment she froze, her heart skipping a beat. It was a familiar sound now, one that brought both comfort and a quiet sense of expectation. The knock wasn't urgent, nor was it forceful. It was simply Michael coming to her as he always did, steady and unwavering. She opened the door to find him standing there as he always was, calm, collected, his eyes meeting hers, with that same warmth she had come to rely on. But today there was something different in the way he looked at her, something more than the usual affection, something that spoke of understanding, of shared experience, of a partnership she was beginning to believe in. "Morning," Michael said, his voice soft but full of promise. He stepped inside without hesitation, as though this space, this life, had become as much his as hers. "Good morning," Jasmine replied, a smile tugging at her lips as she took a step back to allow him in. She felt something shift, something new blossoming between them, an unspoken understanding that they were no longer two separate lives, but two souls finding their way toward one another, building something real. Michael looked around the apartment, his gaze lingering on the familiar surroundings. He had been here before, but this time it felt different. There was a subtle change in the air and the way they moved through the space together. He turned back to her, his expression thoughtful. "This place," he said, his voice almost reverent, "it's like you've carved out a little piece of the world that's entirely yours." Jasmine felt a surge of warmth at his words. She had worked so hard to create this life for herself, this space of independence, and to hear him acknowledge it with such respect made something inside her settle. It was as though she didn't have to prove anything to him. He saw her. He saw her not just as a survivor, not just as a woman trying to heal from the past, but as someone capable of great things, someone worthy of love and partnership. "I have," she said quietly, her fingers lightly brushing the edge of the counter. "I needed to after everything." There was a quiet moment between them, a pause filled with understanding. Michael stepped closer, his hand reaching out to gently touch her arm, a soft but reassuring gesture. "You've built something beautiful, Jasmine," he said, his voice steady. "And now we get to build something together. We don't have to rush it, but I'm here every step of the way." Her heart swelled with emotion, and she swallowed hard as if fighting the tears that threatened to rise. This was what she had been waiting for, what she had been unknowingly yearning for. Not someone to rescue her, not someone to define her, but someone who would walk beside her, who would build with her. The choice she had made, the one that had felt so difficult just days ago, was beginning to feel like the most natural thing in the world. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "Thank you for being here, for seeing me." Michael smiled softly, his eyes filled with a warmth that spoke of something deep, something that went beyond simple affection. He stepped closer, still his arms wrapping around her, holding her in a way that made her feel grounded, safe and free all at once. She let herself lean into him, her head resting on his chest as she closed her eyes. She could feel the steady beat of his heart, and it was the most comforting thing she had ever known. In that moment, she understood. This was what it meant to rise from the ashes, to rebuild not just a life, but a sense of self. She had spent so long holding on to the fragments of who she had been, clinging to the version of herself that had survived the pain, the heartbreak, the betrayals. But now she was learning to let go of the past, to release the pieces of herself that no longer served her. In Michael's arms, she realized that she didn't need to be defined by what had happened to her. She could rise from it. She could be more than the sum of her scars. "Jasmine," Michael whispered, his breath warm against her hair, "we have so much to look forward to." Her heart fluttered at the words. It wasn't just the future he was offering her, it was the present, the space to be who she truly was. She wasn't just a woman recovering from the ashes of her past. She was someone capable of greatness, of love, of a future that was hers to create. And with Michael by her side, she felt as though anything was possible. I know, she whispered back, her voice thick with emotion. I know. They stood there for a long while, the world outside continuing in its ever-present rhythm, while inside the small apartment, they created their own quiet rhythm. The future was uncertain, yes. There would be challenges. There would be moments of doubt and fear. But there was also something deeper, a foundation of trust, of shared dreams, of a love that had been built slowly, carefully, from the ground up. As the days passed, Jasmine found herself moving through the world with a new sense of purpose. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living, and every step she took felt like she was walking towards something better, something brighter. She and Michael had begun to lay the groundwork for a life together, one that was built not just on ambition or success, but on the quiet moments of understanding and support that defined their relationship. In the space that once felt heavy with the ghosts of her past, Jasmine began to see a future taking shape, one where she was not just defined by what she had endured, but by what she was capable of creating. The ashes of the past were still there, but they were no longer the foundation of her life. Instead, they had become the soil from which something beautiful could grow. And as she stood beside Michael, looking out at the world that was now full of possibility, Jasmine knew one thing for certain: she was no longer the woman who had been broken by the past. She was a woman rising from the ashes, stronger, more whole, and more ready to embrace the love and life that was waiting for her. And in that quiet certainty, she found the peace she had been searching for all along. The air in the city had grown heavy with the weight of anticipation. The sky, once bright with the promise of spring, was now draped in clouds, a muted gray that hung low over the streets of Brooklyn. It seemed as if the world was holding its breath, as though everything, every decision, every choice was leading to this moment, the reckoning. Jasmine stood by the window, her fingers tracing the edge of the glass as she looked out over the city. The streets were bustling with life, yet there was a stillness in her heart that she couldn't shake. She had spent so long running from the past, avoiding the things that haunted her, but she knew that sooner or later it would all catch up with her. She had made her choice. She had chosen Michael. She had chosen love again, had opened herself to the possibility of a future that was no longer defined by betrayal or heartbreak. But now the weight of that choice hung over her, like a storm cloud, dark and threatening. The knock at the door came suddenly, jarring her from her thoughts. She froze, her heart leaping into her throat. She didn't need to ask who it was. She had known this moment would come, but she had hoped foolishly that it wouldn't. That somehow Adam would remain a distant memory, a shadow in the periphery of her life. But the past had a way of resurfacing, of demanding to be dealt with. And now it had come to her door. Her breath caught in her chest as she turned away from the window and crossed the room. She hesitated for a moment, her hand resting on the door handle, feeling the weight of the decision that lay on the other side. She had moved forward, rebuilt her life, and yet the very man who had once defined her world stood at the threshold, ready to shatter everything she had worked so hard to create. With a quiet breath, she opened the door. Adam stood there, drenched from the rain, his figure casting a long shadow across the threshold. His face was gaunt, his eyes hollow, as though the weight of everything he had lost had finally caught up with him. He was a man undone, broken by his own choices, just as she had been. And yet, despite the years that had passed, despite the pain, there was still something in his eyes that made her heart tremble. A ghost of the man she had once loved. A ghost of the life she had once believed in. "Jasmine," he said, his voice low, the sound of her name like a prayer he hadn't dared to speak in years. "Can I come in?" The words hung in the air between them, heavy with the gravity of what they meant. Jasmine's pulse quickened, her throat tightening as she stood there frozen. For so long she had told herself that she had let go of him, that she had moved on. But now in the face of him, standing in her doorway, everything she had thought she knew about her own strength and resolve felt like it was slipping away. She opened the door wider, allowing him in, but only just. The silence between them was thick laden with everything that had gone unsaid over the years. The betrayal, the lies, the broken promises. "Why are you here, Adam?" Jasmine asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She wasn't sure if she wanted to hear the answer, but she needed to ask. She needed to hear him say it. She needed to know what he wanted from her now. Adam stepped inside, his eyes searching the room as if trying to find some trace of the life they had once shared. He looked older now, worn down by the passage of time and the choices he had made. He was a man who had lost everything. Everything that had once mattered to him and Jasmine was the final piece he had yet to acknowledge. "I've come to apologize," he said, his voice hoarse, as though the words had been trapped inside him for too long. "I know it's too late. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I've spent every day since you left thinking about what I did, how I destroyed us, and I can't keep living with that. I need you to know how sorry I am, how much I regret it all." Jasmine felt a flicker of something deep within her, something that felt like grief and rage all tangled together. She had heard these words before in the silence of her own mind, in the fantasies she had conjured when the pain of what Adam had done was still raw. She had imagined this moment 1,000 times, Adam standing before her, broken, asking for forgiveness. But now that it was real, now that he was here, those words felt hollow. They didn't bring the closure she had once thought they would. They only reminded her of the truth she had spent so long avoiding, that no apology could undo the damage he had done. No apology could erase the years of heartache, the years of trying to pick up the pieces of herself that he had shattered. "You're sorry," she repeated, her voice trembling slightly. "You're sorry you think that's enough." Adam flinched, the pain in her voice cutting through him like a knife. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words wouldn't come. He had no defense, no excuse for what he had done. He knew this. He had known it for years. But in the face of her anger, her hurt, he felt as small and helpless as he had when he first realized he had lost her. "I don't know what I'm asking for," he said quietly, his voice breaking. "I don't deserve forgiveness. I don't even deserve your time. But I need you to know that I've spent all this time, this wasted time, thinking about the mistakes I made. Thinking about you, about how I let you slip away. I never realized how much you meant to me until it was too late." Jasmine closed her eyes for a moment, trying to steady her breath, trying to hold on to the calm she had worked so hard to find. She had spent so long moving forward, building her life without him, and now standing here in front of him, the past was threatening to swallow her whole. She could feel the old wounds opening again, the rawness of the betrayal that had once consumed her. But she was stronger now. She was no longer the woman who had cried herself to sleep, the woman who had begged for him to change. That woman was gone, and with her all the desperation and longing that had once defined her. "I don't need your apology, Adam," she said, her voice steady, though it trembled with the weight of everything she had been holding back. "I don't need your regret. What I need is to move on, to finally move on from you. And I'm not going to let you pull me back into your mess." She stepped back, her hand falling to her side as she turned away from him. "You can't undo what you've done, and you don't get to make me feel sorry for you. You made your choices. You've lived with them for years. I've lived with mine." Adam stood there watching her, as if trying to find the woman he once knew, the woman who had loved him so completely. But she wasn't that woman anymore, and neither was he. "I'm sorry," he whispered again, the words too quiet, too inadequate to bridge the gap between them. He wanted to reach out to her, to pull her back, but he knew deep down that he couldn't. Not anymore. Jasmine didn't look back. She didn't need to. She had already said goodbye to him 1,000 times in her heart. This was just the final moment, the moment when she could finally close the door on a chapter of her life that had held her prisoner for far too long. When Adam left, he took with him only the remnants of a life that had once been. And for the first time in years, Jasmine stood in the quiet of her apartment free. The reckoning had come, and she had faced it. The morning after the storm was always the clearest, and for Jasmine it was as though the clouds had parted both outside and within. The weight of the past, heavy and oppressive for so long, had finally been lifted, and in its place was a quiet stillness, a peace she hadn't known in years. As she stood at the window watching the city come alive beneath the glow of the rising sun, she realized that for the first time in a long while she was truly free. Free from the ghosts of her past. Free from the shadow of Adam's betrayal that had clung to her for so long. Free to choose a future that was entirely her own. She hadn't known how much of herself she had lost until this moment. How much she had given away, sacrificed on the altar of love, of trying to fit herself into someone else's vision of who she should be. But the past was behind her now, and it had shaped her, yes, but it would no longer define her. She was ready to build something new, a future that was as much hers as it was Michael's one they could create together. The knock at the door came just as she was lost in her thoughts, and for a moment she hesitated. She had grown so used to living alone, to making decisions in solitude, but this time she knew the visitor at her door wasn't an unwelcome surprise. It was Michael, the man who had patiently stood by her side, giving her space to heal, but never leaving her to face the storm alone. She opened the door, her heart fluttering just slightly as she met his gaze. There was something in the way he looked at her, something tender, something that spoke of everything they had shared, everything they had yet to share. "Morning," he said softly, a smile tugging at the corner of his lips as he stepped inside. "I thought I'd bring you some coffee. You know, to start the day." Jasmine smiled, taking the cup from his outstretched hand, the warmth of it offering a quiet comfort she hadn't realized she needed. "You didn't have to," she said, her voice light but full of meaning. "But I'm glad you did." They stood in the quiet of the room, the weight of the moment not lost on either of them. Jasmine had spent so much time thinking about the past, about Adam, about everything that had been taken from her. But now, with Michael there beside her, she could finally breathe easy. It wasn't just the relief of escaping the shadows of the past. It was the recognition of something more. The realization that she had a future to build, a life to forge, with someone who respected her, someone who wanted to build with her, not around her. "Have you thought about it?" Michael asked, his voice steady but laced with a softness that made her heart skip a beat. "About what's next for us?" Jasmine's heart fluttered at the question, but there was no uncertainty in her answer. She had spent weeks, months, even wondering if she was ready to step forward, wondering if she could finally trust someone enough to let them into her world. But now in this moment, there was no hesitation. She knew what she wanted. "I have," she said, her voice calm, the words coming easily now. "And I'm ready. I'm ready to step into the future with you, Michael. I'm ready to build something together. It won't be easy, but I'm not afraid anymore." His expression softened, his hand reaching out to gently touch hers. "I'm with you, Jasmine, every step of the way. Whatever we face, whatever we build, I'm here." The sincerity in his words, the warmth of his touch brought a lump to her throat. It wasn't just his love that made this possible. It was his belief in her, in them, in the future they could create together. For the first time, Jasmine didn't feel like she was walking through life with the weight of the past dragging behind her. She felt lighter, freer, as though her soul had finally found its rhythm again. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. There was no need for words, not with the way they looked at each other. Their hearts were aligned now, and Jasmine knew without a doubt that they had both reached the same conclusion. She had spent so many years afraid of change, afraid of making the wrong choices, but now with Michael by her side, she understood something deeper. Change wasn't something to fear. It was something to embrace. It was the only way to move forward, to build something new and lasting. And with him, she knew she could do it. The path before them wasn't clear yet. There would be challenges, moments of doubt, even times when they both wondered if they were on the right track. But Jasmine understood now that it wasn't the destination that mattered. It was the journey, the shared moments, the quiet victories, the love that grew from the foundation they were building together. They spent the rest of the day together, walking through the streets of Brooklyn, the city that had been the backdrop to their separate lives. and was now the canvas on which they would paint their future. Every step they took felt like an affirmation of what they had chosen of the life they were creating. There was no rush, no need to hurry. They simply moved forward side by side, letting the city's pulse guide them as they built the foundation of their new beginning. As the sun dipped low, casting a golden glow over the city, Jasmine found herself standing at the edge of the Brooklyn Bridge, looking out over the water. The skyline of Manhattan stretched before her, a city of possibilities. She had once looked at this view and seen only the weight of her past. But now she saw something else. She saw a future built not on what had been lost, but on what had been gained. "This is it," she said softly, turning to Michael, her heart swelling with something new, something that felt like hope, like possibility. "This is where we start." He smiled, his eyes filled with warmth as he stepped closer to her. "Together," he said simply. And as the night settled over the city, as the lights of Brooklyn and Manhattan twinkled in the distance, Jasmine knew with quiet certainty that this was the beginning of something new. Not just a new chapter in her life, but a new story altogether. A story of love, of partnership, of growth. It was the path she had been waiting for, the path that would lead her to the future she had always dreamed of. The ashes of the past had been left behind. And now, with Michael by her side, Jasmine was finally ready to rise from them, to forge a new path one step at a time, and to build the life she had always deserved. The city had changed. Brooklyn, once a quiet refuge, had blossomed into something vibrant, electric, with life and possibility. Jasmine looked out over the skyline, the soft glow of evening casting a warm light over the streets below. The world outside seemed to hum with energy, yet here in this moment, standing beside Michael in the apartment they now shared, everything felt peaceful, grounded, as though the chaotic rhythm of the city had finally found its perfect harmony. They had come a long way, both of them, from the pain of loss, from the wreckage of old dreams, to the creation of something new. Together they had built more than just a life. They had built an empire of love, of partnership, of resilience, a love forged not from perfection, but from understanding, trust, and the shared belief that they were better together than apart. Jasmine's eyes drifted over the space, her fingers lightly tracing the smooth wood of the desk where they had spent countless hours planning, dreaming, working toward the future they were now beginning to shape. Their shared vision was becoming a reality, and as she looked around the walls of the apartment, once a quiet refuge now felt like a home. Not just in the physical sense, but in every way that mattered. Here she had found herself. Here she had found him. Michael stood beside her, his presence steady and sure, a quiet strength that had always been there even when they had first met. He was not the man who had saved her. He was the man who had walked beside her, who had believed in her when she had doubted herself, who had never tried to mold her into someone else. He had offered her something priceless, the space to grow, the chance to love without conditions. Their empire wasn't defined by money or success, though that had come too in its own time. It was defined by the way they had learned to navigate the world together, by the way they had chosen each other day by day, and by the quiet moments of shared laughter, of dreams and challenges met head-on that had built the foundation of their love. "I never thought I'd be here," Jasmine said softly, her voice a mix of awe and contentment. "I never thought I'd have this." Michael turned to her, a soft smile on his lips. He reached out, taking her hand in his, and for a moment they both simply stood there, connected in the stillness of the evening. His fingers brushed over hers, a gesture so simple, yet filled with so much meaning. In this moment, there were no words left to say. They had spoken with their actions, with their love, and now the silence was filled with everything they had built together. "You've always had it, Jasmine," Michael said quietly, his gaze steady and full of affection. "You just needed to believe in it. In you." Her heart swelled at the tenderness in his voice. He had seen her in ways she had never allowed herself to be seen before. He had believed in her potential and her strength when she had barely been able to believe in herself. And now here they were building something that neither of them had ever thought possible. You've given me so much more than I ever expected, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. More than I could ever ask for. Michael's eyes softened and he leaned down, brushing a kiss across her forehead. You've always had the strength to create this, Jasmine. I was just lucky enough to be part of it. She leaned into him, the weight of the past finally starting to fade into the background. There were moments when she thought about the years she had lost, when she thought about Adam, about the painful journey that had led her to this point. But now those thoughts didn't define her. They were simply chapters in a story she had already closed, pieces of her past that no longer held power over her. Now there was only the present, the life she and Michael had chosen to build. They spent the next few hours in quiet contentment, talking about everything and nothing. Their plans for the future, the expansion of their business, the little things that made life worth living, things they had never imagined they would talk about not so long ago when the shadows of the past had still been looming. As the evening stretched on, they found themselves walking through the streets of Brooklyn hand in hand, the night air crisp and invigorating. The city lights flickered around them, and for a moment it felt as though time itself had slowed, as though the entire world had taken a pause to let them bask in the quiet joy of simply being together. This is what we've worked for, isn't it? Jasmine said softly, her gaze tracing the outline of the city, the buildings standing tall against the night sky. This is our empire. Michael stopped pulling her gently to him. His hands cupped her face and he looked at her with a depth of emotion that made her heart ache. It's not about the buildings or the money or any of the things we've achieved, he said quietly. It's about us, about what we built here in each other. That's the empire that matters. She smiled, her heart full. Then it's everything I've ever wanted, she said, her voice thick with love. It's everything I need. Together they stood in the glow of the city lights, the future stretched before them in a way that felt both vast and intimate. They had created something that went beyond anything they had ever dreamed of, a love that was real, steady, and true. And as they walked side by side, Jasmine knew that this was just the beginning. The empire they had built wasn't a thing of bricks and mortar. It was built on trust, on the love that had grown between them, on the promise of a future they would continue to shape together. In the weeks and months that followed, Jasmine and Michael continued to build their business, their empire hand in hand. They had become not just partners in love, but partners in everything. They faced challenges. There were always challenges, but each one brought them closer, each one strengthened their bond. And with every step they took, they built a foundation that would last not just for a lifetime, but for generations to come. The world around them continued to spin, but inside their little corner of Brooklyn, everything felt right. The empire they had built was not just the product of hard work, but of love, of trust, and of the quiet moments that made everything worth it. Jasmine had found a life she never thought possible, one of love, one of partnership, one of creation. She had risen from the ashes of her past, and now standing beside Michael, she knew that she was exactly where she was meant to be. And as they stood together facing the future they would create, Jasmine realized that their love was indeed an empire, one built not on the things they could hold in their hands, but on the unshakable foundation of the hearts they had given to each other. This was their empire, and it was everything they had ever dreamed of.